because they wanted to say that there is no future in composition. But I think, on the contrary, we really, I think this is a starting point, because there is a open world in front of us concerning research activities, but particularly pedagogical activities. I would say that we have structures, we have societies in which we can kind of organize meetings about the research, the ongoing research on maths and music. But maybe what we are lacking is really kind of educational programs and networks of educational programs enable really to kind of create this new figure of mathematician and musician, starting from the a little bit like you are doing here in Singapore, starting with the young generation, and then going on until really a PhD program in maths and music. This will be the dream. I mean, really a network of PhD programs. You know that we are kind of struggling doing things in Paris in our ATIAM master program in order to prepare students to be both scientifically and musically capable to do research. And of course, many other places they are doing the same. But what is lacking is maybe a network of all people involved in this pedagogical process. This will be a nice dream for the future, a starting point.
Chongshi, what do you think?
Well, when you raised that question, what went up in my mind is that the future is now. I mean, seeing these few days, how a lot of people from very different fields have come together, and a lot of ideas have been shared and exchanged. I don't know, I have lots of ideas of talking to so-and-so after this and continue with these conversations. And like I guess what Moreno has said, I mean, I think we can bring this further. And it's now because we should just keep doing more of this as we are doing, and then we are creating the future now. Yeah?
I think that's the best compliment I've ever heard about any conference. If the future is now, meaning now at the conference.
That's how I feel.
I think one of the challenges to that, though, is that tomorrow is the past. Literally here, tomorrow is the curriculum that was invented 10 years ago, for example. And in a space with limited time, to create the potentials that one sees in these few days, one has to release oneself from some elements of the past, at least, in order to create the spaces of opportunity for a future that we're experiencing the potential of now. And it's fascinating, for example, just taking some of the points from today about the athleticism of performers, which leave them upstairs in the practice rooms rather than down here in the sessions, whereas actually some of the sessions here may have actually helped the practice room tonight. At least, even if it was only taking moments from things and just re-enlightening, giving new transformations. I mean, and even just some of these, just looking at where the patterns are, and also from Schoenfield's point the other day, that we have to release from those patterns as well, and just getting performers to think about the continuity and the disjunction. And there's so many elements that have come out of this. But unfortunately, what I find more and more in the teaching spaces, the curricular necessities, or the perceived curricular necessities, quality assessments for a start, for example, can get in the way of this opportunity for curiosity. So let's hope the future has curiosity rather than the constraints of some of these structures that sometimes get in the way.
Cliff, I know you have a different kind of experience to offer. What do you say to that?
Well, the idea of this pivoting from past to future, it reminds me of something, actually, Dimitri and I were talking earlier today about relationship between analysis and the role of mathematics in analysis, as opposed to musical, the application of it, say compositional application, performance, or things like that. And there are a number of things that we've witnessed over the past 3 days that remind me of this. So I can think about, studies in expressive timing and things like that you and other people have done, and then also what we had this actual demonstration of this kind of thing in Chris Raphael's concerts, and then also I was just speaking with here about score following and things like that they're doing at EarCom, and I'm very eager to hook up with him on that because I have needs as a composer to do these sorts of things. So I think that this balance and this back and forth, not just between different disciplines, but between different focuses that people have on looking at what has been, but then the issue of practicing musician and composer, trying to achieve things, creates a demand, right, that you have to fill.
And Jian, what's your experience?
Actually, I learned a lot during the past few days, and I really think that mathematical conversation, such a definition, is actually we can have a higher goal and a lower goal. I think for a higher goal, I think such topic is really for those elites, really high elites, to think when they do not have any difficulty to earn a living and just thinking about the future of human being, then we can think about the future of such a real high topic. At the lower level, I think for the future education, I think probably we can just teach those scientific courses in a more artistic way and teach art and music lessons in a more scientific way. This is a lower goal. And for research, I think the most important thing is to seamlessly combine the two different thinking styles, different ways of thinking. In the past, I think the scientific research, usually in the way of psychology and musicology and music practice, is usually too separated. And I think in the future, if we can combine different approaches together, I think such a topic might become more prosperous. I remember after my talk, one of the audience asked me a question: how can you just draw a conclusion by the faster or slower of the tempo? Actually, if I did that should be very ridiculous. But actually, in my article, my conclusion is based not only empirical clues, but also musicological, historical, and cultural background. I combine those elements together, and I draw a conclusion more reasonable. So I think this might be the future, one of the trends in research field, to combine different approaches, including mathematical approach, empirical approach, and musicological approach, and also other kind of approach altogether. Seamlessly combine them together is very, very important.
Yes, if I may add something, I think 60 years ago, there was a discourse at the UNESCO about the two culture. It was by the Minister of Science, by the person in charge of science in England, and it expressed his fears that there is a great divide in our society between humanities and hard science. And I believe that we have shown here that if there is a place, if there is a domain where it is divided, there is a war between these. it's in music. I think that musicians and scientists that work with musicians are pioneering a new way of integrating things, as you mentioned. And this is not only for a dream of a whole person, but I think we have shown here that it is also because it is fertile. It's fertile, it's fruitful, both for the musician and for the scientific, because it raises new scientific question, because it raises new creative dimension, and that's why it is important. And I feel coming 5 years ago, I was a little bit external to this domain, and I feel that really here there is something unique in the interface between art and science. And there is really a pioneering work, and I hope it will continue in the future. We show the path to other domains.
I think I might be the odd man out. I'll tell you why. These days you can hear Schoenberg on YouTube. And one thing he stresses more than anything is expression. And I think that's where my heart is. As I gave in my talk, I think Western music has reached a point of stasis. In fact, that must be the reason why the younger composers are writing what would be backward music as people were writing in the 60s and 70s. On the other hand, in the 60s and 70s, you can get away with being a charlatan, and I'm glad that's not happening anymore. Just a quick story. I was playing one of these pieces by charlatan composers, and at the dress rehearsal, everybody was doing the first movement, and I played the third movement. Second movement, I played with them, and then when they did the third movement, the piano part, I played the first movement. And the composer didn't know the difference, so he went to his grave thinking he thought he was fooling me, and he really wasn't. I don't know if we're ever going to be able to have the sophistication in our brains to hear, for example, 18-note or 24-note scales and all the harmonic possibilities, or rhythms that aren't basically just powers of two, the way our notation system is. Maybe it requires another species. So about the future, I guess we have to go like Schoenberg's. There's still plenty of good music to be written in the key of C.
Responses to that?
I don't mean to put a damper on the evening.
Actually, one thought was actually that quite a lot of what's been explored over the last few days has been much more about expressivity than may have been possible in an equivalent conference back in 1999, for example, just because of the perceptions that have been, because of developments particularly in modeling, that it then becomes more interesting to explore as a performer rather than an analyst or theorist or whatever. I certainly find a lot of, as I said yesterday, a lot of the metaphors that come forward from the modeling process give opportunity for creativity on the stage and so on, whereas I would say 10 years ago, as a performer, thanks to some of the thinking that was around at the time, one was feeling quite restricted and duty-bound, enslaved almost to perceptions of the logic of the score. So actually I think that one of the things I found particularly heartening from the last few days is this sense of a re-emerging appreciation of the moment in time and of its expressive potential. I thought Jean Bamberger's presentation today about that sense of how time is unique is one of the things that it re-emerges with some of this exploration. So I think the risks are very real and have been definitely very there, and we have to be careful that they don't lock everything in and that we find the openings that go forward. But some of the reassessments have been quite heartening. I think the other thing for a future, I think specifically in Singapore, that's quite interesting is the potential for these areas to come together more knowingly than maybe they have in the past. I'm very grateful to the Institute of Mathematical Sciences for connecting up with us. I mean, I thought there was a very interesting set of pieces of information from Don McLean about where NUS ranks overall and where it ranks in the arts. And of course, there's a simple mathematical formula that if the arts get better, so does the overall ranking. And that actually the potential exists here for mapping in both directions. One of the things I think is particularly intriguing, though, is a lot of what we have been exploring is what maths can do for music. And actually, I'm wondering how much people have been able to take away from this through performances or whatever, how music might excite mathematical imaginations. But I have to turn to mathematicians for that question.
Any comments from the floor? Maggie, do you have any thoughts today? Maggie?
Well, I mean, I was also going to say, I think the same as Paul. I would hope that the mathematics doesn't swamp the music. And I think you may well be right. We may have cognitive limitations, which means that we can't intuitively, so to speak, appreciate, for example, a 24-tone scale when we're listening to it. Now, we may, as mathematicians, be able to understand that. That's another thing. But whether we can apply those ideas and benefit from those perceptions in a sensory fashion, I don't know. I mean, obviously, it's largely dependent on our concepts and our expectations, and with education, those will change. But I think, yes, there may well be interesting limits to what the brain can do, which will just stop certain sorts of advance going on, mathematical advance, actually going on in music that people can appreciate and enjoy for itself, not just as a mathematical structure. But I think it's an open question.
One thing to keep in mind with that, I think, is what's leading the horse, when people are doing this. So if it's you have this mathematical thing that excites you and you want to realize it with music, like 24-tone or something like that, then that can be a recipe for trying to create some kind of music that really is not going to be something we can perceive and represent cognitively. But there are a lot of very natural musical things that require deep mathematical processing and understanding. And I'm thinking a lot of us were excited about Aaron's the program Acts, right, where you're improvising this guitar thing. It's a really simple, natural thing to want to get people to do, but it's quite sophisticated, both in terms of understanding musically of what's going on and also how you would represent that algorithmically. So I think as long as you keep, if you're trying to do music, if you're keeping the musical goals in mind, then I think there's going to be plenty of room for some deep work in music and math.
Can I say something as a composer? I thought that this whole thing about 24 tones and whether we can hear it and sense it or make any sense of it just orally, I mean, to me, why, so what if we could not? But I mean, I guess at the imaginary stage, in a creative process, it's always interesting to see what could come out of the possibilities of these various elements just in imagination, and then going through the process and finally arriving at the sound result or performance result to see. And as a composer, that always excites me. I mean, I remember, I think John Cage said something about him not making, writing music that he can hear. I think that's what, something like along the lines that's the reason why he writes music, so that he can realize his imagination that way. And I think that if I think the last session when somebody said the sky's the limit, I think that's the kind of I guess mental position that a creative mind will adopt. And I guess that on the other hand, I would encourage even scientists, and I think mathematicians and scientists are doing that all the time, right? They're always thinking of what's next, what else, and then always either going broader, going deeper, And I mean, like, for example, Bernard talked about, I mean, his performance, he kind of do a parallel kind of modeling, metaphorical modeling using relativity. And yeah, I mean, a lot of all that quantum and relativity, I mean, can we actually experience it in here, now, with this body? I think that a lot of that came out through thought experiments, came out through, I mean, even quantum at the microscopic level is not something that we in this body can experience directly. So why talk, what's the relevance of quantum physics, for example? I guess when you say that how is 24 tones relevant, is that the same question then? How is quantum physics relevant to our daily life?
I have an answer I'd like to say. One of my favorite works of the 20th century is Schoenberg Opus 16, 5 pieces, written in 1909. Rachmaninoff was writing at that time, Strauss, Reger, Sisson. If someone were to submit a competition with a Schoenberg piece, they would say that's fine. 9 years before that, or excuse me, maybe 12 years before that, Brahms died, 1897. But if they wrote something in the style of Brahms, they'd throw it in the trash. That's why I think it's important, because no one's going to win a prize or be accepted at a music school for writing a piece in the style of Brahms. But I think if they wrote in the style of Schoenberg, they'd have a much better chance. Good Schoenberg.
Then maybe schools should change.
Amen.
So are you saying that we might lose appreciation for the artistic creativity from other times, or?
At the University of Michigan, I think that has already happened. I don't know if it's bad or good, but the music is relatively simplistic to what was being done 30, 40 years ago. Right. And a student asked me just a couple weeks ago, do you really enjoy listening to Schoenberg? Because I was performing some last year, and I love it. And of course, maybe it's just from having practiced it a lot that it becomes internalized. I said, yeah, and I couldn't imagine anyone feeling differently, because when I was in school, Schoenberg was still hot. Yeah.
It's very interesting. I had a fascinating experience with a piece of Ligeti in quarter tones, and it was a coaching from Ferenc Rados, and his perspective was that the performance was so bad that the composer was being misrepresented. And Ferenc Rados could actually sit down and sing you the quarter tone version of this piece as a folk song. Mm-hmm. And a realization, if he had been able to take that forward, for example, it was on strings, and he doesn't play strings, he plays piano, but he could sing the part. And one of the things I felt was that actually sometimes some of these pieces, which may have some conceptual beauty or even potentially perceptual beauty, if they're misrepresented from misunderstanding. His specific point was the other 12 aren't the wrong notes. The approach you take to the 12 you've practiced all the time, you have to take the same approach obviously to the other 12, that you believe and trust and value their beauty as much as you did the 12 you do. Whereas the particular performer was, every time it was a quarter note, it was sort of meant to be creating the tension. And to a certain extent, of course, it was, but his take was that there are quarter tones, for example, in Hungarian folk song. And that's what Ligeti was trying to sort of connect into. So it is sometimes about it could be even the passing of time facilitates experience of performers with things so that they come to love material. That journey through time, I think, is one of the real challenges, actually. And hopefully we get an ever richer repertoire as well as reconsideration of past material.
So,
but I mean, do you think that the fact that there are so many pianos around, I know there are lots of violins too, but there are so many pianos around, makes that very difficult because they don't have the half tones?
Oh, I mean,
And people are trained, there's so many people, are trained on pianos.
Yep.
I don't mean,
No.
musicians, but just ordinary people who enjoy music. They may have played around on a piano in their own house or somebody else's. Much less likely to have played around on a violin, actually, because even if there is one around in the house, it's much more difficult to play and to get, So.
Well, it brings something up that for me is becoming quite profound, and that Don McLean sort of raised actually a little bit today. That concept that when you started playing with things and inverting them and wanting to manipulate material, it gets stopped and improvisation gets stopped and so on. One of the things I really wish we could do is that we stop teaching the instrument followed by the repertoire followed by music, but actually we began with some of the fundamentals of music, one of which is that you do sing and you do play an instrument that has got continuous pitch as well as a piano that gives you harmony, and then actually playing around with that for 6 months before you even decided what instrument you played. And the games, people play Tetris, but actually the games of manipulating basic motives and being able to hear them as pieces take place is one of the things that 5-year-olds are much more open to potentially than their parents. But if they began to play with that at the age of 5, the way they might experience music could be transformed. But isn't that what Bach and Mozart and Beethoven did? They all did those three things. So it's how to evolve that sense of a continuous pitch, an embodiment of the sound through singing, and some concept of harmony.
An excellent point. I've had many experiences using quarter tones, 6 tones, and the violinists will say to me, I've been practicing hours a day to play in tune, and now I have to do this. And they're especially if you're asking them to play an octave, like a quarter tone, one note and a quarter tone difference. It's just something in their body that's going to prevent them from doing it practically.
I think if I can add something, here is where computer-aided models can be really useful, because everybody today can practice microtonal systems just by doing patches in several computer-aided existing systems, and then maybe our perception of this kind of repertoire can also change. And I think a great challenge would be to maybe, I'm a little bit provocative, but it would be to maybe convince researchers of cognitive science to take seriously mathematical models. I'm not saying that there is all cognitive science is stuck with just statistics, but we show, I think, very elegant formal models, and I think a big challenge also for the community of cognitive science and cognitive musicology will be to integrate these mathematical processes and structures into kind of psychology protocols in order to really have a better understanding of which are the limits of perception and cognition. Are they really there as generative tonal music, generative theory of tonal music would say? Of course, maybe in a given style, there are some constraints which are kind of in the brain. But if you are just putting constraints before exploring the potentials, I think this is a kind of delicate position, because we don't see. It's like put a kind of wall between us and the future of possible explorations of mathematics into different style of music. I'm not just speaking on kind of contemporary serious music, but also the panoply of pop music, jazz, improvisations, and I think maybe in the future would also be a kind of challenge in the mixture of all these styles.
So putting walls up for us even to understand old music only in a certain way that has been inherited. I think like today's panel talking about voice leading and all that possibilities and mapping, and then John really coming up with that Bach chorale, new Bach chorale. I was just sharing with my friend that's kind of like using the grammar and syntax, and it's like tonality developing on a parallel universe, perhaps, and
But perhaps I can give a personal experience in the reverse direction, because we speak here about how music can help to understand, how mathematics can help to, or formalization, computer science can help to understand musical phenomena. But I want to say that I experienced the other direction. How music has helped me to understand, for example, the idea of duration, and to discover that there is no time in computer science, there is only events, for example. And when we have to deal with duration, the flow, the continuous flow of time, in fact, before working with composer, I was not aware that we can work. There are psychological descriptions of time suspension, stretching of time, and I can do nothing with that. But the composer said to me, yes, but there are grass notes, point d'orgue, the tempo is changing, I have fluctuating estimation of the tempo, and that give me clue on something to grasp, to understand this notion of duration. And if I want to develop programs that interact with humans, I have to understand how the human are living in time. And I cannot just forget that one essential dimension of time is duration. There is not only events. And composer talking in a true dialogue with composer help me to understand some facet of this concept, and to code something, to integrate something of this notion in computer science.
So that's a reversal.
Yeah.
Yes, great example. We're pretty much out of time. We have, speaking of time, we perhaps have maybe, if there's a pressing question from the floor, we could take that in closing. Yes?
Quick question for Lanskey. In terms of mathematical education, at YST, is it possible for a student to pursue a dual degree in, say, music and mathematics or computer science?
At present, the only opportunity is between engineering and the recording arts program here. But we're actually in the middle of a 2-year institutional review, and this will be at the core of that change. So actually what we're looking at is, well, what we recognize is there are 24,000 undergraduates on this campus and 220 full-time places here. There's a lot of musical talent out there that isn't currently having the opportunity to interact here, and that our students would grow through that interaction, and those students would get closer to finding their identities through that possibility. So the university is being very supportive of this possibility, but we're still at the generic mapping stage. The ambition is that as many as possible of our activities will open up to the possibility, for example, of a second major in music with a first major elsewhere in the university. But it's quite a radical shift in some senses from what we've been running with now, but in other senses it's just the next dimension in the context of Singapore.
Great.
All right.
And I must say, sort of just as a final, these sort of correspondences, and this has been such a wonderfully stimulating conference from that perspective, encourages us to open this up. And some of the points, like students starting to generate how they take forward their projects and so on, rather than it being predefined too much. These are the sorts of things that open up. And you get different personalities which will help make the environment, you know, the conservatory model has traditionally run the risk of being quite conservative in its thinking about evolution. And what we do need to see is how we build on that while respecting the most healthy dimensions of the art we love. And so it's how to take that forward.
And, we have another pressing question.
I have a sense that this is the end of the panel, and the panel is the end of the conference, and I do think that something needs to be said about how wonderful this conference has been, and how much we all want to show some appreciation for Elaine, and for Bernard Lanskey, and for their colleagues in the mathematical institution. So I think this is the time to do that.
Thank you. May I just say some add to that? Many people have made this possible. Bernard Lanskey, who's been enormously supportive. And the Institute for Mathematical Sciences, Louis Chen, who's sitting right there. He's been here the entire time. Bernard Tan as well. If you could come up to the stage. Yes, Bernard Tan and Louis Chen. And Gérard Assayag, my co-conspirator. And from the Yongsu Conservatory of Music, Yixian Tang, who's been amazing. She took care of all the logistics, and she's like 3.5 people in one. And Jenny Ang, who isn't here, and various people. Craig DeWild is here, seated here. He's been really helpful. Ruth Rodriguez, Chengshi Ho, and Jasmine Chong at Raffles. And Eileen Tan and Emily Chan, who've done an enormous amount of work for the workshop as well. I know they're there, so if they could come up to the stage, that would be great. Eileen and Emily are from the Institute for Mathematical Sciences and have been key in conducting all the organizational meetings, as well as helping out with the running of the workshop these past 3 days. So without all these, two of my students, one former student, are also here. Jordan Smith, who will be coordinating the publication following the workshop, if you could come up. Lu Wei Yang, who has been helping with the website and putting the videos online. By the way, all the videos have amazingly been available the evening of each day. So they're all on YouTube. So if you missed any session and want to catch up on it, or you want to see another presentation again, you can go to YouTube. Lu Wei, come up. And Katerina, who was the coordinator and organizer of the poster session. So all three of them should come up too. So, and one more student who's in London but helping with some of the logistics, Yanis Sokolovskis, but we'll thank him over the internet. So with that, we'll close the workshop, and thank you all for being here, and it's been a wonderful time for us. We hope it's been a good one for you too.